Good morning. I'll just introduce myself as we make sure sound and everything as well. My name is Dr. Kimberly Armstrong, and I have the pleasure of serving as superintendent of Portland Public Schools. I'm here to announce that we are excited with the release of data. Data is important because it allows us to focus ourselves on the work that needs to be done on behalf of students. Our growth has remained steady in English language arts and math. And there's really 3 points that I want to lift up for you all this morning. I think the first is the investments that we've made has paid off. For the third straight year, we've continued to outpace state averages in both ELA and math. We are continuing to prioritize resources in the spaces that it's needed most. The other part that I'm super excited about is the work that we're doing around literacy. As you all know, we've received some state funds for early literacy for our youngest learners to begin to really ramp up to reading and competency, and that work continues. We'll be excited to launch a citywide literacy campaign with some amazing partners in the coming months. But in the meantime, I will say that literacy remains a top priority of mine as I transition in as superintendent. And I think the last point that I want to make is that we're future forward. We're planning for a $40 million deficit, and it's going to count. We're preparing for a $40 million deficit, and it's going to take all of us to lean into the conversations that are happening at the state level so that we can ensure that we're being funded in the ways in which we need. In order to continue to make the growth and the gains that we've made, we need to be able to be resourced and have all of our needs met. And so that will count on, we will count on not only our public officials, but all of our folks in Portland to continue to share out what our needs are and to do everything we can to make sure that we reduce that deficit heading into the next academic year.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Renard Adams. Again, I'm the Chief Accountability and Equity Officer for Portland Public Schools. Pleased to be with you here this morning. I'll keep my comments very brief. Our 2024 OSAS results show the resilience of our amazing students and the dedication and hard work of our educators and building leaders who work tirelessly every day to create robust learning environments where students can achieve and thrive. As Dr. Armstrong mentioned, across all grades 3 through 8 combined, our students have held steady in their English language arts achievement and have shown some growth in mathematics. Our students with disabilities also showed some improvement in academic achievement. When we dig into the data, we see that Black and Latinx students have made some gains in 3rd grade reading and 5th grade mathematics. These are encouraging signs, and we know that we still need to accelerate the learning of our Black, Brown, and Native students. Still, we have much work to do. We're not satisfied with our results because, frankly, our bar charts and percentages don't say 100% yet. Too many Black, Brown, and Native students are not demonstrating proficiency in ELA and mathematics. We still have predictable achievement gaps along the lines of race, ethnicity, special education, and English learner status. And as I previously shared, these gaps are persistent, they're generational, they're unacceptable because they're at odds with our belief that all students can learn. We know we can and must do better by our students, and we're working very diligently to do just that. Thank you.
We're happy to take any questions that you may have. I'll go first, and then we can go to Dr. Adams.
Dr. Armstrong, you mentioned Portland Public is ahead of the rest of the state for scoring, still lags nationally. What are you doing, and what can you do to continue that recovery efforts and get Portland Public where it needs to be?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I will say that, as I mentioned before, for the 3rd straight year, we have been onboarding and training our teachers to use the high quality instructional materials. 3 years ago, we had a robust adoption in both mathematics and ELA. And so we're able to see now some of the growth from that work. We're continuing to prioritize learning for our educators who, I agree, have really leaned into the work. I know that there were some disruptions and things, but the way that folks have came back to rally. And I would also say that the way in which we're prioritizing our resources for students who are struggling to meet the expectation, that we're putting our resources and prioritizing in that way.
Dr. Armstrong, I have a question. I'm just curious, you mentioned early literacy as one of the things that you're most proud of. I'm just curious for the kids, who are past the early literacy stage. I mean, I feel like literacy rates being flat at 55% is not the best numbers that those could possibly be. What are the investments that are being made to address the kids, past grade 2 to grade 12? What are those investments looking like?
Yeah, well, I'm proud of the fact that our growth has remained steady. I'm not proud of the fact that we're still in a crisis. Anytime that we don't have 100% of our students reading at grade level, it's a concern. It's a crisis, really. And so when I talk about the citywide literacy campaign, I'm talking about that opportunity for our business leaders, our community partners, our families, and our students to lift up literacy in a way that speaks to the needs that happen in our school. We're continuing education and training around the science of literacy. We're continuing to make sure that our curriculum materials that were adopted are used with fidelity, and we are paying attention to the data and monitoring. I know we come out annually to talk about the Oregon State Assessment System data, but we're monitoring data much more frequently, and we're paying attention to those numbers and resourcing appropriately.
If I may add to Dr. Armstrong's answer, going into this year's budget, we prioritize academic interventionists in elementary and middle schools so they could target those students in the upper grades 3 through 8, who were not reading and doing mathematics on grade level. So that is one of the investments that we made going into this current year.
And do you feel that those have paid off so far?
We feel like we saw some promising results going into this last year's budget cycle, and we will be continuing to monitor those results. We're just a couple weeks into the school year, so it's a little early for us to know if those investments are quite giving us the results that we want just yet.
What other investments have been made? Particularly, like we're talking about, like an increase in math scores. What are some things that have been done that you attribute that success to?
Well, I think, as Dr. Armstrong said, investing in high quality materials that are grade levels and standards aligned, and the professional learning for our educators to help them bring those materials to life have been key investments. We know that materials matter. We also know that holding high expectations for all students matter, and presenting and enabling them to have grade level content matter. And so those are things we've been focused on.
I would add to that to say that another investment that we've made for our teachers is making sure that we had an instructional coach in every single one of our buildings to be able to support educators.
And what you talk about what you'd still like to see done, like these gaps that persist that you'd like to see closed. What are some future investments that are being talked about to address those gaps?
Well, we are just now starting our budget process for the next academic year, and so we're collecting data. As I've mentioned in previous times, my 3 priorities coming in as superintendent is safe and supported classrooms, it's lifting literacy, and it's building trust and relationships. And when we began to unpack that work, we're seeing some priorities around our early learners. We're seeing priorities around what it takes to support a classroom, making sure that our students are receiving the support that they need from a social emotional health standpoint to an academic interventionist, or getting the academic interventions that they need. And so over the coming months, you all will hear more about the ways we're engaging community through our budget process, because we know the statement, right? Show me your budget and I'll tell you your values, and we want our budget and our values to be aligned.
Dr. Armstrong, thank you so much for being here and for taking our questions today. I'd like to circle back to what you said about PPS outperforming the state. That's true, and it's been true since before the pandemic as well. However, demographically, that's also to be expected, given that the population of students at PPS are by and large whiter and by and large wealthier and better educated than the state. In fact, our demographics would suggest that our numbers should be above where they're at. I just wonder if you could help me put that in context or figure out how to think about that.
Sure. One of the things that's been interesting since coming here in PPS is actually being in an urban school district that outperforms the state, right? Many of the school districts, the school district I used to work for, we were not in that position. And it is often because the school system has higher proportions of students who are experiencing poverty, higher proportions of students who are Black and brown. What I would say is we know that we have lots of students who struggle. We understand and dig beneath just the fact that we have a lot of students who may be more affluent. And we look at those patterns underneath, which is why I wanted to mention that our Black students and our Latinx students were making some gains in third grade reading and fifth grade math, because I think that shows that when we put in some targeted investments, we can get to students who are typically further from performance and further from the margins.
You know, the number of actual Black students in the school system is really relatively small, and yet they do really continually lag. Doesn't it seem like it's so small? Doesn't it seem like there's a way to lavish resources and make it better to pull up those numbers?
Sure, and we believe that that began with materials and professional learning. It continues with academic interventionists who can target and work with students. We also have schools that create a block of time during the day called What I Need Now, so that students can receive that just-in-time support. We also know that initiatives that have been supportive in the past, like high dosage tutoring, some summer programming, also can help us reduce that slide that students achieve. And I agree, we have, it is factual that we have smaller numbers of Black and brown and Native students than some other districts, and we should and can and must do better by them. And we continue to try to unpack root causes as to why that isn't quite happening yet and what we can do moving forward.
I love to respond to that too, right? There's no secret that our communities of color have been systemically harmed in this city and beyond. And so it's not just about, well, if we can just like do this one thing, won't we see achievement increase? I think it's a whole redesign of our system, right? We need to make sure that we have the instructional materials in the spaces where it's needed. We need to make sure that the environments that our students are in are well designed to make sure that it's a safe learning environment, not just intellectually safe, but emotionally safe, and that they're physically safe. We have communities who are continually experiencing a tremendous amount of trauma and harm. And so the business of school looks vastly different than the way that it looked 20 and 30 years ago. And so we're responding in real time, which is why it's important that we take this conversation to Salem and say that we need all of our funds to be directed in the way that's going to lift up our learners in our system and really move that conversation that's going to be impactful and make a difference for every single one of our students, not just one. There's not just one pocket or one area in Portland that we want to go to say this is what teaching and learning looks like. Every space that we visit, that we occupy, high quality teaching and learning is happening, could happen at higher rates, and is our obligation and our duty to make sure that it happens every single day.
Are there particular schools that, having combed through the data, you are looking at, okay, these are places where we really need to direct resources?
We are still, that's a great question, Julia, thank you. We're still doing some analyses there, because what we're doing is we're working with Dr. Franco, our chief of school, Christina Howard, our chief academic officer, and the senior directors of school performance in order to think about and examine what building leaders said they would do in their school improvement plans, and then what did or didn't happen in terms of action and results to figure out where we can differentiate resources. So we're still in the process of making those and doing those analyses, but I really appreciate the question.
And I would love to say, I want to lift up the fact, I know I'm using the word lift a lot because this is a day about lifting our story and our work. I want to acknowledge that our Oregon State Teacher of the Year, Brian Butcher Jr., over at Beaumont Middle School, was recognized yesterday as Oregon State Teacher of the Year. Beaumont Middle School is a place that experienced double-digit gains in mathematics last year and double-digit gains in ELA this year. So we do have some amazing things happening in spaces, but as Dr. Adams stated, our goal is 100%, and we continue to press forward until we reach that number.
Can I ask what a rough timeline of that looks like? I mean, I feel like this is the third year where, post-pandemic, there's been so much struggle, and it just seems like that's not really improving. It's going up, it's going down. Your mathematics, you can brag about it all day if you want, but I mean, it goes up like 0.2 across all grade levels. I mean, and it goes down in a couple. So I mean, I just feel like everything is fluctuating. I mean, what is the timeline before this is the reality of the situation in education at PBS?
Yeah, listen, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the question. As Dr. Adams mentioned, for large urban districts, I mean, we're the largest in the state. Most systems, large urban and the largest in the state, aren't experiencing gains at all, and as a matter of fact, aren't even remaining steady. Now, not that I want to compare, Portland Public Schools to districts that aren't experiencing the tremendous gains, but I think more to lift up the point that we are at a place where in public education, we have to do everything we can to advocate for the funds that we need so that we can continue to resource our classrooms, so that we can continue to make sure that professional learning is happening in all spaces. As mentioned, we want to celebrate our growth and we want to acknowledge the incremental growth, and we're not settled until we're at 100%. I would love to be able to say that by next year we're going to be at 100%, but we have to make sure that our goals are measurable and that they're appropriate for the work that we're doing. And so we haven't yet set what that predicted number should be over time. I know that we have some board goals that speak to some percentages for some of our students of color. I think the most that I can share right now is that we are continuing to lean into the work. We're continuing to prioritize what's happening in the classroom. We want to make sure that our teachers are well resourced, that they continue to be attracted to the profession of teaching, and that when they arrive here in Portland, that they stay, and that we keep the narrative on our students that are the furthest away from academic justice. Because when we do right by those students, we do right for all students.
If I might be able to just follow up really quickly, is there like an accountability measure that you're putting in place? I mean, something like a 5-year plan, or how is the district going to be held accountable for continuing to see better results, or do you guys have anything in that?
Well, absolutely. Well, I will tell you the superintendent's evaluation is tied to the results that our students make. The ways in which I interact with my leadership team is tied to the results that we make. Our building principals have this thing called a comprehensive school improvement plan, and they start with the percentages of students who are the furthest away from academic promise, and that is how the conversations start when setting goals about the work that needs to be done. So accountability, right? We know that means is, can we be counted on to do what we said we would do? And I hope that our community, I hope that our families, and I hope that our students can enthusiastically say yes, because that's the expectation that I have as for my team, and I know that's the expectation that the school board has for me.
I wonder if you guys could address the question of transparency and parents being really aware of how their students are and are not performing. As I know you're aware, Dr. Adams, there's been some changes this year in how PPS presents state standardized testing results to parents. I'm a PPS parent. I'm also an education reporter. I gotta tell you, I found it incomprehensible. And not to be like, look how great I am, but if I find it incomprehensible, I think there could be a real issue for parents not being able to interpret the data and figure out how to help their children.
I appreciate the question. Yes, we, because of some budgetary decisions that were made some adjustments to how we deliver test scores. We're working right now frantically to be able to also display the former test report that was mailed home in the parent view section of our student information system. We hope to have that in place in just the next couple of weeks. The challenge with electronic is that things are immediate, so the scores show up right away before we can get the report together. But we are addressing that concern, and we want our parents to be informed and have context around those scores, so that is coming.
I understand this is a question that everybody's mulling over, and it is reliant quite heavily on state funding. Is there a timeline for when you were hopeful or expecting to return to those pre-pandemic levels?
In terms of student performance?
Yeah.
So we returned there last year, and with this year's results, we've seen some grade levels where we've taken a slight step back, and some grade levels where we've maintained, and some where we've taken a slight step forward. And so that is just the first step, right? Because what we know is pre-pandemic wasn't 100%, it wasn't 80%, it wasn't even really 60% in most cases. And so we know that isn't enough. And we are working diligently as a leadership team to figure out what levers we can press, and with the support of our labor partners, what we can do to really bolster student achievement to higher and higher levels.
Thanks, you guys. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone have anything else? I stopped at you because you'd asked me that question before, so
Well, I do have another
repeats.
question.
Go ahead.
It's for Dr. Armstrong, I think. You've talked a little bit about state funding today, and, I understand there's a coalition of superintendents really working on presenting their case and so on this year. I'm just wondering, how much of that state funding do you think should be tied to, or should be directed funding? In other words, if the state says to you, we're going to give you more money, but you've got to use it for frequent high-dose tutoring, is that something that in a local controlled state you think superintendents are open to, given the concerns about these results?
Yeah, I appreciate the question on state funding. I think what I will say is continuing to emphasize that we're facing a $40 million deficit. Last year, about $30 million were reduced from the budget, and so that would mean that this year 40, because I think it was identified last year that there was about 70 million that needed to be reduced over the 2 years. And so when I think about the conversations happening at the state level, I'm excited by the governor's conversation on funding the current service level. We know that there is still the QEM that is a point of conversation, and we also know that we're trying to move that conversation to be more responsive to what we need in different spaces. So whether we're addressing unfunded mandates, whether we are talking about specific funds to address literacy or mathematics, we're open for the conversation. Like I said, it's going to be an uphill battle over the spring addressing that $40 million, and so any and every help that we're able to receive on the part of our elected officials will be welcomed and is wanted.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We're going to end now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.